All right. My streaming app says that I am live. Let me get Twitch opened up on my phone here. View dashboard. Okay, there we go. Oh, the app changed. All right, well, I think I'm live, everybody. Say something in the Slack. It's not showing anyone connected yet. All right, I see someone saying something in the chat room. So, tonight's stream is all about content management systems. Specifically, we're going to be looking at WordPress. Looks like someone replied here. Oh, looks like someone's having to reboot their machine to connect to Twitch. All right, well, I'll start my introductions at least. That'll give everyone a chance to join. So we're going to be talking about WordPress, and when we were designing the course, the Web Design 2 course, I knew that one thing that I wanted to do was to prepare every student who took Web 1 and Web 2 to be able to be a freelance web designer. And nowadays, you can build a client a website, and they'll pay you to do that. But what is especially difficult is handing that website off to them for them to run on their own. And clients these days demand being able to just add content to a website on their own. And actually, frankly, as a web designer, you don't want to spend most of your time just updating the content on a website. So what freelance web design has really morphed into over the past 5-10 years is designing a theme, designing the shell, the design of the website, and using something called a content management system to allow other users who might not have the expertise in CSS and HTML that you have now to be able to create the content. So that's where content management systems come into play. And I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce you to WordPress, because even as of my Google search a little bit earlier tonight, WordPress accounts for 30% of all the websites out there, which is just hard to believe. But 1 out of every 3 websites is likely powered by WordPress. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can go about setting up a WordPress site. What we're going to do tonight relies on your virtual machine that you created just a couple weeks ago for your hosting your midterm website. But there are other ways for you to use WordPress. And that takes us to the comparison challenge. What I would like you to do is try to get a feel for what exactly a content management system allows you to do by comparing WordPress to another popular CMS. And 2 of the ones that I'm most familiar with from my work with art students at Mid-Michigan College who go through our art program and at the very end present their portfolio, I've found when I watch those presentations that many of them have used something called Wix.com or Weebly to create a website. And they're very easy to use. You sign up for an account and you start using a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get: drag and drop interface to build web pages. You don't have to know HTML or CSS. Usually, if you know HTML and CSS, you have a few superpowers. But at the heart, those are content management systems. I want you to sign up for a WordPress.com account and a Wix or a Weebly account. and I want you to be able to compare and contrast what that experience is like. WordPress.com is slightly different than WordPress itself. WordPress is an open source content management system that has been around for well over a decade now, I believe. Probably inching up to 15 or 20 years now. It's open source. It's free. We're going to download and install it on our own servers. That's completely free to do. If you want to host your own WordPress site, you definitely can. But if you don't want to have to set up a virtual machine or set up a cloud server, you can sign up for a WordPress.com account where this company, WordPress.com, is going to host the website for you. And if you want them to host it at a domain name that you own, you can pay them to host it. So WordPress.com is not necessarily free. You can sign up for a free account, but when you start wanting some of the features of that hosting and a custom domain name, you start paying. WordPress.org is where we're going to download the open source side of WordPress from in just a little bit. So your first assignment this week is to compare and contrast what's it like using WordPress to what's it like using Wix or Weebly. I had a few questions in the Slack earlier this week about what you can turn in. I think in this Moodle assignment, I wrote that you can either write up a short paper or create a short presentation. If you want to use Google Slides, that's totally cool. What I would like you to point out is when there's similarities, just take 2 screenshots and say what's similar about them. By using 2 CMSs, I think you're going to get a feel for what the common features are. Okay? So in the Slack chat room, let me know if you have any questions about this comparison challenge. Let me get a sip of water while I wait here. The main event, though, and the whole purpose for this live stream is to set up WordPress on your virtual machine. We have installed Ubuntu several times, and tonight I wanted to streamline this live stream as much as I could. So we're not going to install Ubuntu from scratch again. If this was a cooking show, I would have a few things already baked in the oven. And what I want to show you is on my computer across the room, I am running VirtualBox. And the reason I'm running it on a separate computer is mostly because if I run it on the computer that's doing the live stream, my computer gets really slow, the fans turn on, and my audio starts messing up. So I run it on that machine over there, and I connect to it remotely. The benefit of this, though, is it's so close to what it's really like hosting your web server somewhere else that it's like it's in the cloud for all intents and purposes. So I'm going to just close this window here. And the way that I am going to connect to that Linux virtual machine is through SSH. So I'm on a Mac. I'm using the terminal application. And I am going to use SSH to connect to that virtual machine. So I'm going to use my username at, I wrote down the IP address. I think it's 192.168.7.108. Now, your network might be different at home, but this is where I had tried to really emphasize the importance of using that bridged adapter on your virtual machine. And as far as I can tell from what I've looked at in the midterms so far, I think everyone was able to connect to their VM from their phone when they were looking at their midterm project. So that I was really happy to see that. If you turn your virtual machine on again this week, I'm pretty sure it will likely have the same IP address. The harder thing might be to remember the password for logging into your machine. So hopefully I have mine written down. So I am now connected over SSH to this virtual machine. If you're on a PC, which I think all of you are this semester, sorry, excuse me. Not the best live stream experience. I'm sorry about that. If you're on a PC, you're probably going to use PuTTY to connect with SSH. And remember, that's a little bit different. You'll actually create a connection in PuTTY, type in the IP address and the username that you want to connect with, and you don't actually end up typing the SSH command yourself. You fill in the values for connecting to SSH, and it will ask you for the password, and then you'll connect. But at some point, your SSH session is going to look a lot like this. White text on a black background, probably. Yeah. So I hope you're able to get connected that way. Now, where is this virtual machine at? This is the one that I set up most recently. So if I visit this in a web browser, here's this 192.168.7.108. I get the default Ubuntu page. I had edited that during the live stream to say Brandon up at the top. And if I go to the grid bootcamp final, you see the 3-column design that I created. It's a simple Linux virtual machine that's running the Apache web server. It has some files on it. That's totally okay. If you want to know where those files are at, they are in /var www/html. And so I got a few files here. If you were to go into this directory, you probably have your midterm sitting there right now. That's totally cool. It already has Apache. So there is a command that you can run, apt-cache space policy, and then you can type the name of a package. I'm going to type Apache 2. And what this is going to show me is that Apache 2 is already installed. If you watched the live stream from last year, I had some problems with my VM, so I had started with a brand new blank virtual machine for that live stream. We're going to save a little bit of time here because we already have the latest and greatest Apache installed. So let me close that tab and get back to the VM challenge. Our goal tonight is to install WordPress so that when you go to that IP address, you don't get that Ubuntu page, you get a WordPress website. To do that, we're going to be following a couple tutorials. Everything that was presented in our Ubuntu live stream and in my notes, my outline of notes, that still applies. All that was still valuable, but I really am going to lean heavily on 2 DigitalOcean articles. The first one is about how to install Linux, Apache, MySQL PHP, or LAMP. That's the abbreviation that stands for this very powerful and very popular combination of software. Linux as an OS, Apache as the web server, MySQL as the database, and PHP as the scripting language or the programming language that is going to generate our website dynamically every time you visit a WordPress page. LAMP is so popular. If I search for what percentage of the web servers are LAMP out there, it's probably way more than 30%. It's probably like 75% or something crazy. That is just an acronym for those packages. Now, what that means tonight is we're going to have to install every one of those. We've already installed Apache or Linux and Apache, so we're about halfway there. And then we're going to focus on installing MySQL and PHP tonight. That'll be probably about 2/3 of tonight's live stream. The last thing that we're going to follow is this article from DigitalOcean about how to install WordPress. Once we have all the prerequisites, we will be downloading code from the WordPress.org website, doing some configuration, and then visiting the WordPress site in the browser to finish setting up the website. Tonight I'm not going to have time to actually walk you through how to use WordPress. So a lot of your experimentation on your own by signing up at WordPress.com is going to help, but I've also provided links to WordPress 4 and WordPress 5 essential training from lynda.com. LinkedIn Learning. If you visit those, they are extremely long video series. I have to provide a link to both because WordPress 4, a lot of that content still applies even in the newest WordPress. And so what it looks like LinkedIn did or lynda.com did is they created a 5-hour and 40-minute course all about WordPress 4. And when WordPress 5 came out, instead of republishing the entire course, they only updated the content that's new. So this WordPress 5 course is about 2 hours long. It doesn't have all of the same content as the WordPress 4 one. It only added things that were different. You do not need to watch all of these videos this week. What I would recommend doing is watching the introductions of both courses and maybe watch as they start building pages and posts because that's going to help you with the CMS comparison challenge. We'll be doing more next week with WordPress itself. But I did provide those links in case you prefer watching videos about how to use WordPress. My next 2 tabs that I already have open here are the 2 DigitalOcean articles. So, let's just dive in. I'm going to start scrolling down here. The first step in installing the LAMP software is to install Apache. Now, I told you that we already have that installed. Let me get my screen set up here so that we can see my commands and this window all at once. That'll make it a little bit easier today. Okay, so if I run sudo apt update, that is going to prompt me to enter my admin password. Sudo apt update, goes out to the Ubuntu website and looks for updated information about the software that you can install on Ubuntu. You'll want to run that to speed up all the other commands that we're going to run next. It tells us that there's some packages that can be upgraded. I'm not going to worry about those right now. If I run these commands in this tutorial, it'll install the updated packages that are applicable. The next command is to actually install Apache. Remember, we ran that command that showed you that Apache is already installed. If we run sudo apt install Apache 2 today, that is actually going to look for newer versions of Apache. And as you can see right here, it told me that Apache 2 is already the newest version, version 2.4.29. So there's nothing new to install. We're already past that first step. At the bottom of step 1 is information about the firewall. And if you watch my video from last semester, I kind of went through all of this to try to prepare you for running a firewall. I don't think we have many CIS majors in the class right now. If you take our networking courses, they will talk about firewalls a lot more. Think about firewalls as like a brick wall that protects your server or your computer from people coming in. If you want to host a website, you have to allow certain things in through that wall. So you have to poke holes in the firewall to allow HTTP traffic to come through. HTTP traffic comes typically over port 80 by default, and port 443 if it's HTTPS or secure. So this uncomplicated firewall, it's called UFW, comes with Ubuntu, and it has some pre-configured templates, I guess you could call it, for allowing just those things to be opened up in the firewall. So you can actually say to allow all of Apache full through and OpenSSH through. And if you were to enable the firewall, then only those ports would be open. Now, I'm not going to do that today because it didn't really do much in my video before. If you decide to turn on the uncomplicated firewall, which you do with the sudo ufw enable command, you will want to make sure that you have configured OpenSSH to be allowed through. Otherwise, you won't be able to connect with PuTTY or SSH. So I encourage you to read through those steps more carefully if you want to do that, but I am going to scroll past them. They tell us to check to make sure that Apache is working. Remember that we already did that. We went to Brandon's Ubuntu default page. The next part of this section talks about finding your public IP address. I had a really good question about that when the midterm was submitted. Someone wanted to know if I needed to visit their IP address to see their website. I didn't need that. And in often cases, your internet service provider will not allow you to have port 80 open. I know like Charter, which is really popular in our area, used to block those ports so that you wouldn't host a real website from your home on their network. You were paying for internet access, not to be a web host. So I don't think that's applicable here. When you're working in your VM here, it's entirely in your own network. We don't have to worry about looking up your public IP address. So that's the A in LAMP. We've installed Linux. We've installed Apache. Next up is MySQL. We're going to use the apt package manager to install that. So I'm just going to copy sudo apt install mysql-server. I have not installed this yet. So it lists all of the things that MySQL requires to be installed for it to work. And that means I need to say yes to proceed with the installation. This might take a little bit. The yellow box here in DigitalOcean says that they didn't have you rerun sudo apt update because you already have the most updated list of packages, because we did that a few steps ago. So it has returned me to my command prompt. I'm back to my username and the folder that I'm currently in. I know that someone had a question about this before the live stream began. They were trying to connect to MySQL, and it was telling them telling them that the password is required. I think in particular that you might have skipped this section right here, which is they recommend that you run a script called MySQL secure installation. And you have to run that with sudo. I'm going to paste that in right now. But it's MySQL, when it gets installed by default, leaves a lot of things open by default that people consider to be insecure. Like by default, it doesn't have a MySQL password, or it lets people to connect to it from anywhere. We're going to run this script, which is going to walk you through a series of questions. It's like a wizard that will hopefully allow you to tighten down the security to your database. Why would you need to protect your database? Well, you aren't hosting credit card numbers on your website, but you are going to be hosting, you're going to be creating a WordPress account, and you're going to have a username and password. Oh, someone did reply in the chat room saying that they did do the secure install thing. The U and P thing worked though. Okay, so pay attention. I think that what happened then to you is even if you ran this script, I think you might have answered one of these questions differently than I am going to right now. So the first thing that this wizard asks is, do you want to turn on the validate password plugin to test any passwords that you create for MySQL? It would reject any bad passwords. I am going to say, no, we're not going to set up the validate password plugin. And we're going to choose a root password. Now I'm going to type in a password that I know it's not too secure over in my notes over here. You will want to keep this because if something goes wrong, you might need that password to connect to the database, like you did in the chat room. You have to enter it twice. Next, the secure installation is going to ask, do you want to remove anonymous users? So this is going to prevent people from logging in without a username and password. And so I think we want to say yes to this. This is the question that I think you may have answered differently in the chat room. Disallow root login remotely. Normally, root should only be allowed to connect from localhost. This ensures that someone cannot guess at the root password from the network. So we're going to disallow the root login. And then it asks, do you want to remove the test database and access to it? I'm going to say yes to that. And then it asks, do you want to make all of these changes active now? I'm going to say Y for yes. And so it reloaded permissions. So I guess now let's see. In my video from last semester, I was able to connect with sudo MySQL. Yeah, and so that let me connect without typing in a password. What someone was getting on their system is they would get an error message, and it would say something like, you need a -u or -p command. So if I were to try to connect to MySQL without sudo with the root user and ask for a password, I would have to type in that root password. And because of the questions that I answered in that secure installation, the root user is not actually allowed to connect this method. Yours, it does work, but I think it's all because of how we answered some questions. And I know you probably can't, scroll back to it, but if I had to put money on it, I would say that you and I answered this question differently. Disallow root login remotely. I said yes, you probably said no, and that's where things differed. But anyways, we have MySQL installed, and you can test that by typing sudo MySQL to connect. The simplest thing that we can do inside of MySQL right now is just take a look at what databases exist. The command for that is just show databases, and you have, kind of like with JavaScript, you have to end every MySQL command with a semicolon. So the databases that exist here are information schema, MySQL, performance schema, and sys. There are 4 databases here. Take note of that because after we install WordPress, there will be 5. So I am going to quit to get out of MySQL and back to my Linux prompt right here. And let's keep scrolling down. We're past all the MySQL stuff. I guess they did show you how to run a query. So next week, we're going to talk a lot about databases, and I will have you actually connect to your virtual machine and try running some queries on your own. We're not going to focus on that this week. So I'm going to scroll down. Look at that. We're already to the P, the last letter in this crazy game that is installing LAMP. So PHP, I said, is a programming language. We're going to install it, but by default, PHP is used for writing command line tools or writing scripts that can interact on the computer. We want to install PHP and use it with our web server, Apache. So what we're actually going to install, if you follow this command, and I guess, is my screen in the way here? Let's see if I can shrink my head here. There we go. That might help a little bit. We're going to install PHP, yes, but we're also going to install something that connects PHP to Apache that allows the Apache web server, when it sees a PHP file, to send that to PHP to go do some fancy magic and then show a web page. And we're also going to install a package called php-MySQL. You can probably guess from the name that that has something to do with allowing PHP to connect to the MySQL database. So we're going to install these 3 packages. And if I paste them in here, it's actually going to install quite a few things that are all required by those packages. I'm going to type Y and let that install while we talk. There are actually quite a few other PHP libraries out there that allow PHP to do some cryptography, to generate images, and that's going to be required by WordPress, because one of the coolest things about WordPress is if people like drag and drop an image or upload a photo from their phone, it will automatically create thumbnails of those images so that your website loads fast. And in order to do that, it needs to use a few other command line tools to do that resizing. So we're not done installing packages yet, but this is enough to get LAMP ready for WordPress in the beginning. So we've installed PHP. We're going to test that out in just a little bit. But what we want to configure in Apache still is to tell it that if someone goes to a URL on my website, like if they go to 192.168, whatever, / and you hit enter, we don't want that index.html file to appear as the default web page if there's a PHP file named index.php. So what we're going to do is use the Nano text editor to edit a configuration file for Apache. Now, all of these configuration files for Apache are located underneath a folder called etc. In this live stream, I'm going to just call it etc. It probably looks like etc. to you, but for whatever reason, I've been trained over the years from just listening to other server administrators that people call that the etc folder, like ET and C. So anyways, I'm going to edit this file just by copying and pasting this command. We have used Nano quite a bit. Remember that at the bottom of the screen here where it shows the caret and the letter, that's like holding the control key and hitting something. What we need to edit here, if I scroll down, you'll see that they highlighted index.php in red. That's showing up right here. This is like a hierarchy of the files and the preference or the weight that they carry. So if someone is going to a folder and it was going to display a default page, what wins out? The way it's configured now, index.html wins out. So we want to use our arrow keys to move around here and type index.php in front here. And then, someone asked me this last semester, and I don't know if you have to delete index.php from the list later on. I do, because that's what they explain to do. If you want to test that, feel free to see if it breaks anything. But the order that we have is index.php first, then index.html, and all the rest. The reason this is important is so that WordPress will actually win out. And when you go to the front page of your website, you see WordPress instead of some other HTML file that might be there. So we need to now exit. So Control X is saying, do you want to save? I'm going to say yes. It's asking where to save it. I'm just going to hit enter to overwrite the existing file. If you get an error here, it's probably because you forgot the sudo command. And then they say that Apache needs to be restarted so that it knows that you changed that configuration, that hierarchy. So the command for that, it uses that system control program that we talked about a long time ago. Sudo systemctl restart Apache 2. And if you want to check on the status, you can actually change that to be systemctl status Apache 2. And that Apache status comes back with a green light, which is good. There's a lot more detail here. You can actually see under the covers here that Apache actually is running multiple things at once. It spins up by default a minimum of 6 processes, 6 copies of itself waiting for web connections. So the reason that a web server is able to handle thousands of people connecting at once is that it runs multiple copies of itself waiting for people to request things. I think that's cool. It's not entirely important, so I'm just going to hit the Q key to get back to my command prompt. If we want to, we can also make sure that we go back to our web page and refresh, and it seems to still be working. Yeah, my Ubuntu page comes up. And if I scroll down here, they talk a little bit about how to find other PHP packages to install. We're going to skip that because the WordPress tutorial that will follow next will tell us how to find those. And step 4 is new. This was not in the live stream last semester. DigitalOcean, remember, is a web hosting company. You would buy a server from them and set up multiple websites that you might want to host. They will talk. This section about step 4 is geared towards people who want to run something like a website like kishba.com, like I run, and then setting up multiple sub websites like web1.kishba.com and web2.kishba.com with things called virtual hosts. We are not going to do that with our VMs, so we are going to scroll past this. And I am pretty sure that we are done. Oh, we're not quite done. Step 5, testing that PHP is working. This is worthwhile. Let's do this. So we need to create a PHP file. Now they tell us to go into this your domain folder. We didn't do any of that garbage. So I want us to focus on the var www HTML /var/dub/HTML. Sorry, I say dub, www for World Wide Web. In here we have HTML files. Let's actually create a PHP file. They tell us to create a blank file called info.php. So, I don't know if I have permission to write in here. I might have to sudo, but let's just try nano info.php. And there's no warning about it being read-only, so I can start typing, I think. So the code that we're going to type in here is PHP code. You are very comfortable with HTML tags. Think about this this less than sign question mark PHP as like an opening tag. This is the opening. This is the character that tells Apache that this is PHP code that needs to run. Apache by default is going to work with HTML tags and find them. We needed a way to slip away from HTML and tell PHP to go do some magic. So by default, that is a less than question mark PHP to open. And eventually you just start seeing these things. And then we can write PHP commands. And so we're going to write we're going to call a function called PHP info. And when you call a PHP function, you have to use the open and close parentheses. And just like JavaScript and MySQL, we have to end each line, each command in PHP with a semicolon to say we're done. And then we're going to close out of PHP. So we wrote a single line of PHP code, and we are going to exit to save. Hopefully that saved. You might have had to do sudo instead. This is the magic right here. We've got info.php right here. Now let's try visiting that in our browser. I'm going to open a new tab. 192 blah 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 my IP address /info.php. That certainly doesn't look like PHP info, the text. Instead, that command actually will generate a diagnostic screen with information about the web server that's running and about the version of PHP that's running. So as of today, that's version 7.2, running on Ubuntu 18.04. How awesome is that? If you scroll down in here, there's a lot of information that doesn't matter to us. I'm going to just look for the MySQL section. So you'll see that MySQL is installed. And is connected to PHP. That's all good. There's really not much more I want to show you in this configuration. If you installed additional software for PHP, like libraries for PHP to use, more information would appear on this screen. we are merely trying to verify that a PHP file will show more than just the text PHP info. So I think we're doing good there. They do warn you that you should delete this file when you're done with the rm command. So I am going to do that right now. You'll see that it's there, and I'm going to type rm info.php, and now it's gone. The reason that they ask you to remove it is because that page might accidentally show aspects of your web server that a hacker could use to find vulnerabilities. For instance, if there's a particularly old version of PHP that you're running, and they know that PHP version whatever allows hackers to send a certain command and get a certain result, you don't want to give that information away. And I have actually seen at Mid-Michigan College and even on my personal website that people will look for a file called info.php because a lot of people create them and forget to delete them. Okay, so that is the end of the LAMP tutorial. We're doing good on time. We're only half hour in. That's amazing. Let me pause. Any questions about installing the M and P in LAMP? We are about to venture forth with WordPress. Sweet. Okay, no questions. We are going to move on to the W. So let me go over to my other tab here. So under prerequisites, it says that you need to be able to run sudo on your server. We've done that today, so we're good. You need to install the LAMP stack. We did the L, the A, the M, and the P. They talk about securing your site with SSL. We are not going to do that today. We don't have a domain, so we're not going to be configuring any of that. So on to the main event. So step one in this tutorial for WordPress is to create a MySQL database and a user for WordPress to use. So at the very top here, they tell us to connect to MySQL with this command, MySQL-u space root space -p. This is going to work for, it sounds like, a few people in the chat room. Because of the questions that I answered when we installed WordPress, I am going to run a different command. I am going to run sudo MySQL. But this command is probably exactly the equivalent of running this on the one student who contacted me before class about this. So now that we're in MySQL, what are we going to do? Well, last time you saw me type in the command show databases. This time we're going to run something a bit more fancy. We're going to create a database. They provided the code here. Now you don't want to copy and paste the word MySQL and the bracket. You want to copy the rest of it though. We want to create a database called WordPress with all of these options. So I need to copy all the way to the semicolon. And I am not going to type this. I'm going to copy and paste. So if you're using Putty and you get to this point and you've been typing everything in, pause and actually try to do the copy and paste. The way copy and paste works in Putty is if you're in the browser over here, you can still Control-C, but then when you get it over to Putty, you right-click and that pastes it in. On the Mac, I am actually using Command-V to paste my code in, and then I can hit Enter. But it's right-click on Putty to paste. So if you run that command, hopefully you see the same thing that I do, which is query OK, one row affected. And I'm going to use the up arrow to actually go up to my previous command that was show databases. And now you'll see that I have a database called WordPress. That's awesome. We're not quite done though, because we created the database named WordPress, but we also need to create a user that can connect to it. And I guess I should pause. We're following the tutorial step by step here. When we do your final project and you set up your own WordPress site, everyone is going to be doing that not on their virtual machine, but on my shared server that I give you access to. So at that point, you'll be changing the name of the database because not everyone can use WordPress. We'll have to put your first name or your, I think in past semesters I've had people use their mid username, and I will coordinate all of that when it gets time. But for this tutorial and for your virtual machine, feel free to copy and paste this, including the next part, which is to create a user. In this tutorial, we're just going to create a user called WordPress user, and I'm going to leave the password. If this was a real server up in the cloud, you'd probably want to choose a better password that's much more secure. And if this was up in the cloud, we would probably have to change the database name here to whatever we had chosen in the previous step. But because we've been following this step by step, I'm going to copy this grant statement. What the grant statement is going to do is say the WordPress database needs to have a user that can connect with this password. So I'm going to hit enter, and it says 0 rows affected, 1 warning. I think that warning is that the password is really weak. I'm not entirely certain on that, but based on the wizard that we followed, I think when I created this, it realizes that password is a terrible password. Okay, so before we leave, we need to run the flush privileges command so that MySQL will actually basically restart and allow that new user to connect. But then we're going to type exit semicolon to get out of MySQL. Now, this step is not in the tutorial, but I would actually like to verify that this user works before we try connecting WordPress to it. So we're going to connect the same way the tutorial showed us how. Instead of sudo MySQL, though, we're just going to type MySQL without the sudo, and we're going to use that space-u flag to connect as WordPress user, and then space-p. So what this command is going to do is run MySQL, try to connect with the user called WordPress user, and then ask us for the password. So far, so good. It's asking me for a password. Let's see if I remember it. Oh, you know what? I tried typing in a password, but if I paid attention, we set it to password up here. Let me try that one more time. Let me type in password. Okay, I'm connected. That's good. So this is different than connecting with the root user. And I want to show you how I know that. If I type show databases, before I saw like 4 or 5 databases there. When I'm logged in as this WordPress user, the only database that I actually can do anything with is called WordPress, and that's all I see. So if you are this far in the tutorial, you are doing great because you can connect to the database as the user that we're going to use for actually installing WordPress. So I'm going to exit out of here. So we're done with step 1, which was preparing MySQL for WordPress. Now we're going to finish installing some PHP extensions. I mentioned to you that WordPress does other cool things like resizing images to make a photo gallery. That uses the PHP GD library. I forget what GD stands for. Graphics, probably something. But then other parts of WordPress work with something called XML. It's a lot like HTML. There's a zip library that allows, I think that's what WordPress uses to like install plugins or to create backups of its content. So we need to have all of these PHP packages installed. This tutorial says to run sudo apt update to get the latest software information, but I'm pretty sure we already did that today. So this isn't going to really come back with much. You know, it's building up more information than I anticipated there, so maybe that was worthwhile. But I'm going to copy and paste this long list of PHP extensions to install. And you'll see that it actually comes back with even more packages that are dependencies of that. So I'm going to say yes to install these. We'll twiddle our thumbs a little bit here. The yellow here mentions that if you're going to go crazy and install even more WordPress plugins, you might need to install additional software on the command line to support it. Later on in the semester, like I think in week 13 or 14, we're going to install a plugin for WordPress that lets you set up like an e-commerce store. I don't think it requires any extra packages, but we will be looking at some really cool plugins. That's almost done installing. It looks like after it installs those, we have to restart Apache for those changes to take effect. So I'm going to copy that command to restart Apache. It's the good old systemctl command. All right, we're getting close to the fun stuff. So Apache is our web server, right? One of the coolest features of WordPress that I love is that when you create posts and pages in WordPress, the URL for those is kind of dynamically built. So instead of creating a URL that looks like, 192.168 blah 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 / index.php !post ID = 112, you can tell WordPress to take the headline for each blog post and make it be part of the URL. And the best example that I can show you of this is actually right up here in DigitalOcean, right here. If you see this URL, how it has /community/tutorials /how to install WordPress with LAMP on Ubuntu 18.04 with the dashes, WordPress is going to do that for us. We're going to be able to create a category called tutorials, for instance, or a group called tutorials, and we'll be able to have our headline be called something like Hello World, and it will automatically create a lowercase URL with dashes between the words for that post. And it's a beautiful URL that is really handy for search engines. The title of the page is a URL. It's beautiful. But in order for that magic to work, we have to turn on one feature in Apache. And that one feature is called htaccess overrides. We have to allow WordPress to be able to create its own configuration to tell Apache about. And by default, Apache doesn't let that happen for security reasons. So we have to actually explicitly tell Apache to allow this. And in here, they write the directions as if you had your own virtual host for WordPress. And I told you earlier that we don't. So we're going to follow the advice that's in this yellow box. We are going to edit. So we're going to use sudo nano. And actually, let me go into this folder here, the Etsy Apache 2 sites available. I'm going to cd into that. There is a file here called 000default.conf. That's what's called out in this yellow section here. And we're going to edit it. So I'm going to use sudo nano, and I'm going to actually type in 00 and hit dash to fill in the rest. Make sure you're in that correct folder. And we're going to edit this configuration. Now, we're going to change a few things in this configuration. The first thing, and this is not actually covered in this tutorial, so hopefully you take note of this from the live stream, and we're about 47 minutes in. I'll probably reference this when I talk to a few of you later. We're going to change this document root. This path is probably really familiar to you, the /var/www/html. That's where you've been putting your files up until now, but we're going to put WordPress in a different folder. And we want Apache to only serve up that one folder for the purposes of this challenge. So I'm going to get rid of the /html, and I'm going to type in /WordPress. This is where we're going to put the WordPress website that we download in just a little bit. So we need to change that. And the other thing that we need to do, and I think we need to put it anywhere inside these open and close virtual host tags. So I prefer to do it kind of down here near the bottom, right before the virtual host tag closes. We need to put in this directory tag with the path to where WordPress is going to be located, and I'll say allow override all. That's what's going to allow WordPress to configure those fancy URLs. You can copy and paste this, and it's going to look like that. If you are kind of a perfectionist like I might be, you might want to tab those in for better indenting. But I think that's the only thing that we need to do in this file. So those two things, just to recap, we're putting the directory allow override all piece in, and higher up we change the document root. Okay, so we're going to exit with Control X, Y to save, and Enter to overwrite that file. If you scroll down a little bit, you're probably already thinking, don't I need to restart Apache? And you're absolutely right, but just hold that thought. We're going to enable the rewrite module. We're going to use a command called A2nmod, that stands for Apache 2 enable module. We're going to enable those rewrites that allow you to have those fancy URLs. So I'm going to paste that in. And now at this point, we need to restart Apache. But there's actually a cool option. If you run sudo apache 2 control, there's a configuration test that you can run. Since we actually edited the Apache config by hand by typing, I would recommend that we run this. And it tells us a couple interesting things. It says, warning, the document root var www WordPress does not exist. They are absolutely correct. It doesn't exist. We haven't created it yet. Luckily, that's just a warning, so we can proceed on. And then it also says Apache 2 could not reliably determine the server's fully qualified domain name using 127.0.1.1 set server name directive globally to suppress this message. This is just a warning, and we're not going to be able to fix it because we don't own a domain name. We're not setting up any DNS stuff, so we're just going to let that warning stay there. The main thing that we're looking for is syntax okay. What that means is that code that I copied and pasted into the 00 default.config file is a-okay. If I had forgotten a closing symbol or opened a tag and not closed it or typed any command that wasn't correct, I would not get this syntax okay, and Apache would fail to start. But since we got that message that it was good, we are going to restart Apache for those changes to take effect. And at this point, it might be worth going back and trying to look at your IP address to make sure that Apache still works. If you get an error message, I'm going to refresh. It's likely a not found because we did not put, we haven't created that WordPress folder yet. There's nothing in it. So there's no web page to display, but at least Apache is running. That's the good news. So how do we get WordPress? Well, we're going to download it. I like this tutorial because it has us download the file directly from the WordPress website without having to go to the browser and download it and then copy it up with CyberDuck. We're actually going to run a command that is going to go download a zip file from the WordPress website. It's really cool. So they recommend that we start out in a folder called /temp. This is just a temporary directory. Because we can write to it, there's no permissions issues here. If you do an ls in here, you'll probably see some weird looking files like this. It's totally okay. We're just going to download a file with a program called curl. So the command is actually curl-o, and it's wordpress.org. You need the HTTPS, and then /latest.tar.gz. This is a zip file, or a GNU zip file, I think, technically. Whenever WordPress releases a new version of their code, they promise you that it will show up in this latest.tar.gz file. So we're going to download that. Curl, I don't know if we've used it yet this semester. It's a lot like a browser, but it's not like a browser that you use as a GUI. You basically say, go do something with this URL. And we're using the -o option, which means to like open it and download the file. So we're just going to, I'm going to copy this in. And you'll see that it gives you a status over, how long it's taking to transfer. You can do a lot of cool things with curl. You can actually like pretend to submit a form with curl. So if you've ever wanted to automate filling something out on the web, chances are you could find a tutorial on how to use curl to do that. I'm doing a project right now at my work where I am trying to compare two different websites to see if they're the same. And the differences are so subtle that I want to just download the source code and compare them. So I'm actually using curl to automatically go download the two websites before I do something with them. So curl is really cool. Now that that's downloaded, I'm going to type ls, and you'll see that that file latest.tar.gz exists in my folder. You may remember that when you have a zip file, it's all the files inside of it are kind of compressed into one, and before you can do anything with it, you have to unzip it. We're going to use the tar program, and we're going to send the commands xzvf, which if you ask me what all of those flags mean, one means extract, one means what type it is, the V stands for verbose, I don't know what the F means. Anyways, you run these flags with this command, giving it the file, and what it's going to do is turn that zip file into all of its original folders and files, and you get to watch them stream by here. So it created, if I type ls, a WordPress folder. And if I go into the WordPress folder with cd, there are all of the source code files for WordPress, and these purple files are actually directories. So there's lots of files underneath those folders. We're going to essentially copy this out of the temp folder to its final location, but they want us to do a few things first. They want us to create the htaccess file that we enabled Apache to read. So we're going to use the tuck command, and I know we talked about that, to create the htaccess file. If you want to see if that was actually created, you can't use the ls command because it starts with a period. Any file that starts with a period is hidden by default. So that's what that ls-la command that I always run comes in handy. It's going to show in list mode all the files, including the .htaccess file. So pro tip there. In this list of files, there is a file named wp-config sample.php. This WordPress sends this file with places that's like a Mad Lib. You have to fill in the configuration values for it to connect to your own server. And because you have to manually intervene with that file, they distribute a sample, and we have to copy the sample and then fill in our information. So that's what this next command does. It uses the CP, or the copy program, to copy the sample file and rename it to wp-config.php. So I'm going to paste that in. And they want us to create a folder called upgrade. When there's an upgrade folder, that allows WordPress to, on its own, go download a latest copy of WordPress and put it in this subfolder for it to use. And just so that there aren't permissions issues with that, we're going to make that right now with the make dir command. And now we're ready to copy them outside of the temp folder to that var folder that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to copy the command, but let me describe what it does. We're using sudo so that we have permission to do it, and we're going to use the cp command with the -a flag. That means copy everything, including hidden files like that .htaccess file. And we're copying from /temp/WordPress/period. That means go into this WordPress folder and grab every file. That's what period stands for. It does that recursively. And then space followed by the destination. And we're putting all of that in /var/www/WordPress. No slash at the end. It's actually going to create this folder for us because it doesn't exist. So let me copy and paste that. It actually went really fast. So now, if I had to tell you one step that people kind of forget about at this point, including me, it's that they stay inside of this temp folder. From now on, we're going to not be working with the temp folder. We essentially want to go to the var www WordPress folder. So let's type that right now together. cd/var/www, you can tab complete, /WordPress. We are now in the real WordPress folder, and if I type pwd, that is in var www WordPress. We're not in the temp folder anymore. This is the most common thing that I helped students with last semester, and even when I taught this class face-to-face in a computer lab, we all oftentimes edited the wrong files. These are the files that are hosted by Apache now. So the first thing that we have to do is fix a few permissions. We want to allow WordPress to be able to create files, and if you want WordPress to upload and create thumbnails, it needs permission to change things. So we're going to run a few commands. And I think you've used chown already, because if you wanted to be able to upload your midterm project, you had to give yourself permission to that HTML folder. We're doing something very similar, except instead of giving your username access to this folder, we want to give Apache access to the folder. So Apache, when it gets installed, creates a user called www-data and a group called www-data. So I'm going to copy and paste this command. This is giving Apache permission to the WordPress folder because Apache is the user that is running the WordPress website. Next, owning the files is not enough. We need to adjust the permissions. And this is something that's beyond the scope of this course, but I did Google chmod 750, which is one of the commands that we're running. And I got a handy little article called How to Use Octal Notation for File Permissions. In Linux, there's 3 levels of permissions. The first is for the owner, the user. The next is for the group. And then after that, everyone else. Or I guess in this article they call it others. So you can give users read, write, and execute access, or groups read, write, and execute, or everyone else read, write, and execute. And the short way to express that is with these 3 numbers. And the way that this works, it's a big binary thing. So if you remember our color lecture from Web 1, where Anthony Freds converted from binary to hexadecimal and all that awesome stuff, the way that file permissions work in Linux has not gone much further than this octal notation. The digit 1 represents execute. The digit 10 or 2 in your head represents write, and the digits 11 or 3 in base 10 represent write and execute. Now, here's where I want to pause you. X and W here are 1 and 2 combined, or 3, okay? If you wanted to just say read, though, that is 100, that is 4 in base 10. And so if you want to do combinations thereof, so if you want to give someone read and execute, that would be the equivalent of 4 plus 1, that would be 5. So that would be read, execute. 6 is read and write. 7 is read, write, and execute. None of that is going to stick in your head. I know. I honestly have to look it up every single time. This semester, it's been so long, I just used the numbers in my head. I couldn't even remember if the first digit was user or the owner, and the second digit was the group, and the last digit was everyone else. So that doesn't matter long term. But what I wanted to essentially tell you as you're pasting this command in is that we are essentially saying that for the directories, for the folders underneath WordPress, that's what this type D filter is doing. We want to make sure that WordPress is able to read, write, and execute and delete all of those. The group is able to do that too, but then everyone else in the world is not able to do that. And then the second command finds files, not folders, and gives it read and write access, but not execute access for the owner. So we're going to run these two commands. Let me paste them in. It might take a little bit of time because it's touching every single file with the second command in that folder. I'm pretty sure that WordPress would probably work without those commands run, but you probably would notice that you might not be able to upload an image. You might not be able to install a plugin. It's better that we get these permissions set now than in a week or two. All right, so setting up the WordPress configuration file. If you remember, oops. Oh, look at that. I lost permission to list things because bkish is not in that. I am not in that group. I'm not even allowed inside of WordPress. Oh my gosh. Oh, what did I do? I wonder. I'm going to exit and connect again. I'm pretty sure that I should be in the www data folder or group. No, I'm still not even allowed in the WordPress folder. Okay, so we are going to fix that. And the easiest way that we can do to fix that is add me to that www data group. Wow, this is a tangent that we have not found on this live stream yet. We're going to say add user to group Linux. So we're going to use the command, where is it? Add an existing user account to a group. For example, to add the user geek to the group, sudo use the command user mod-a-g sudo geek. So I want to add user mod-a-g, and we're going to add www data, we're going to add bkish. And I'm going to type in my password. Okay, so I am not in that group yet. I'm going to re-log in. Okay, so I'm in the www data group. So I think at this point I should be able to get into the WordPress folder. Okay, I can. Now, you might not want to go through that. Remember, sudo is your friend in this case. If you were getting that permission denied error, you should have been able to just do sudo ls. And it would ask you for your password, of course, if you could type it right. But it would have listed the files for you. I wanted to be able to actually do that without sudo. So what I did is I cheated and I put bkish instead of geek inside of the www data group, because we had just gone through the effort to say that all files were owned by www data and just www data. Another thing that we could have done is instead of giving ownership to www data for the group, we could have put bkish in there or your username or something. There's a lot of things we could do. Frankly, I don't think you're going to be editing much in this folder manually. WordPress is going to do it all, and we're always going to be using sudo. But that's just an interesting side effect I have not run into officially yet. But the reason I wanted to do that is I wanted to show you that we have this config file. We have not edited it yet, and we need to do that next. In the chat room, someone had asked if maybe I was still in as the WordPress user. I like that question because it allows me to distinguish that we created a WordPress user, but WordPress user was just in terms of the database. Remember, Ubuntu has user accounts, and that's what I'm connecting with SSH. If you're ever unsure of what users you have in Ubuntu, you can always do an ls on /home. So this is going to look in the home folder and list the folders that are in there. And typically when a user is created, it gets a folder. The www.data user did not get a folder. If you wanted to see a complete list of all the users on Linux that exist, I think the easiest way to do that would be I'm going to do sudo cat etc shadow. Yeah, maybe shadow's not the right one, but this technically has our encrypted passwords in it. But this file contains information about every single user. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's past WD. Oh yeah, I like this one better. So okay, there's a file that stores all the information about all the actual Linux users, the Ubuntu users that exist. So that includes root and a bunch of these other ones, including now www.data that was created when we installed Apache. There's a fun user called nobody that doesn't have any access to anything and is redirected to something that doesn't exist. There's an interesting user called pollinate. I don't know what that is. But then there's bkish. That was the one that was created when I installed Ubuntu. And when we installed MySQL, there was a MySQL user created as well. So that's a complete list of the Linux logins. For a complete list of the MySQL users, let's do sudo MySQL. And I'm going to type show databases. This gets kind of really meta because all the configuration about MySQL is kind of kept inside of MySQL. So if you type use MySQL, there's a database that contains tables, and one of them is a user table. So if let me describe user. There is a field in here called, oh, this is the worst way to do it. Describe user. Okay, so there's a table called user, and we're just going to do user. I'm pretty sure password's in here too. I guess it's not. So we'll just do select host, user from the user table. So this is a query that I just wrote that asks the database what users do they have are installed in, or created in MySQL. And so this is where you will see the WordPress user that we created. There's also a root MySQL user. There's so many pieces of software that we've installed now in Linux, and typically every time you install a new platform or type of software, you're installing like a system that has its own users and passwords inside of it too. So it's kind of hard to keep them straight, but I'm glad you asked the question because there are Linux users, there are MySQL users, and in about 30 more seconds, there are going to be WordPress users as well. And those are separate things. Now, when I created them all, I probably all chose the same password. But in the real world, they are very much different usernames and different passwords. I hope that was helpful and not super confusing. Let's try to get back to WordPress. I think we're still ahead of the live stream from last year, so I'm pretty proud of us here. So what were we doing? We were trying to look inside of this folder, and we need to edit this config file. And this is where we're going to use curl to help us out, because we need to, one of the things that we need to do in this file is set up some values that are used to make our WordPress installation unique, so that when someone creates a user in WordPress, like signs up to make comments on the website, when they type in their password and we store a copy of it, we don't store it the same way that another WordPress installation is going to store it, because we don't want people to know what the password is or to be able to reverse engineer it. So cryptography like that requires the use of something called salts. So if I take you to this web page URL right here, that's from the WordPress secret key generator. I'm going to open this up in a, I thought I had it open in a tab. Maybe I don't. Let me open up a new window. So this api.wordpress.org/secret key/1.1/salt. If I refresh this web page every single time, you'll see that it changes. This is a random generator. It generates random values to go inside of these variables: auth key, secure auth key, logged in key, nonce key, auth salt. These are the secrets needed and the salts needed to protect the passwords in your WordPress installation. So what they have you do is use curl to visit this web page from the command line. So I'm going to run this command from the command line. And it's a lot like visiting it in a browser. With curl-s, it is just showing the results on the command line. It's not saving it to a file. We need to copy this value because we're going to paste it into the config file. Notice that it says it is important, and they say this in red, it's important to actually get the values yourself. And they go so far as in their sample output, they write, do not copy these values. If you were to take this, including the do not copy these values, and paste it into your file, someone out there in the world might have predicted that you did that, and they might be able to reverse engineer your passwords out. If they got a copy of your database, they might be able to reverse engineer what people's passwords were in WordPress, knowing what these values were in the beginning. So they go out of their way in this tutorial to tell you you should not copy from their webpage. You should copy from this random generator, this api.wordpress.org output. So make sure you have that on your clipboard. So where do we put these once we've copied them? Well, we need to be in this folder, the var www WordPress. We're good. We're in the right folder, but we need to go into the wp config file. So I'm going to nano wp-config.php, and I can't stress enough, you need to be in the right folder, the var www WordPress. If you edit the temp one, it's not going to take effect in your actual WordPress site that you are hosting with Apache. I've been there. I've done that. I'm going to edit this. Now, if this is a very long file, I'm going to scroll through it. There will be a place near the top here that defines the database name. We're going to come back to this section and fill it in, but we're going to keep scrolling down with the arrow key, the down arrow key, to the section called Authentication Unique Keys and Salt. Here they are. We need to replace these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Control K, which I think is listed here as, I thought Control K was, yeah, Control K, cut text. This is not the same clipboard that we're using with Windows or the Mac. This is just inside a Nano. You can Control K, and that will delete a whole line at a time and put it in its own clipboard to paste later. We're not going to paste it though. Where we're actually going to paste, for me, I'm going to hit Command V. On Windows with PuTTY, you would right click and it would put in those values that we copied from the website. Now, it is very bad that I'm doing a live stream and showing you my values. You would not want to show this to anyone else, but this is just on a VM that I'll throw away when I'm done. So I've pasted those in. So we've done that. We deleted those lines. We pasted them in. Now we need to scroll back up to that section up at the top to tell WordPress how to connect to its database. So scroll up to where it asks for the database name, and you can't use the mouse. You have to arrow over. I'm sorry about that. But you need to type in the database name, which if I remember right, we had called that WordPress. That's what's in red down here. And if I scroll down here to DB user, that is where we want it to be WordPress user, because that is the name of the database account that we created MySQL for it. And then we have to type the password, which was very bad. I left it as password. The host name we can leave as localhost, and we can leave the character set and the collation the same, but they do want us to add one more line. So right below that last define db collate, I'm going to add a line that says define open parenthesis fs method single quote comma space single quote direct. You could copy and paste that. Nano luckily does color coding now, so I can see that my quoted values are in yellow and the word define and the open and close parentheses aren't highlighted in red. So I got them all in there, but if you want to copy and paste, go for it. What this line is going to do, if I scroll back up, when it's set to direct, it knows that you've gone through and given the permissions at the Linux level to allow WordPress to edit files. If we didn't do that and we tried to install a plugin or a theme or run updates in WordPress, it would actually prompt you for FTP credentials, and you would have to type in like your Linux username and password. We don't want to go down that route. We're going to give WordPress direct access to upload files. So let's exit and save that out. Oh, look what I did. Error writing wp-config.php. I didn't sudo nano. So I have to redo all of this. Oh my gosh, everybody. Sudo nano. I did it, guys. I'm not the only one out there. I bet you did too. At least one person. You know my pain. So let's scroll back down to those password values. I'm going to Control K. And on my Mac, I have a program that keeps all of my clipboard history for a while. So I'm just going to paste those back in. You might have to recopy and paste those. But then I have to remember to type the database name. WordPress. Username is WordPress user. Password is password. And then this time I'm not going to mess around. I'm going to copy and paste the define fs method. I think that stands for file system method. So we're saying WordPress has direct access to the file system. Control X, save, yes. Okay, it's saved. Moment of truth, everybody. Can we get to our website by IP address? And when I go there, what am I going to see? Am I going to get a 404 error? Am I going to get a error 500 internal server error? Or am I going to see the WordPress logo? Cross your fingers. Success! That is the WordPress logo. Let me make this full screen now here. We can now go through the rest of the setup from this website. I'm going to choose English. This is where I'm introducing you to the next set of credentials and the WordPress users that are out there. I'm going to call my site Brandon's Bistro. For the VM challenge, rather than have you create a brand new web page, if you just want to use content from your midterm project, the Brandon's Bistro, that is A-okay with me. Even for your CMS comparison, if you're just looking to create pages, just copy what you've already done for another project and save yourself some time. Now we need to create a username. I am going to make mine the same just so it matches. And I'm going to set a really terrible password. It even tells me that it's very weak. If you want to use a weak password, you have to confirm that you understand you're using a weak password. And I don't think I typed it in right, so I'm going to type that in way more slowly. You can enter your email address, web2@minrich.edu. And I would recommend that you try to hide your site from search engines. Since this is on our VM and it's private, a search engine probably isn't going to find your site anyway. So we just fill out this simple form, and it's going to do the rest of the installation on its own. Best case scenario. Yes, success. So we're going to click login, and hopefully you remember that username and password you chose. And just like that, we are logged in. Now at this point in the video, I'm not going to show you how to use WordPress. That's what those other Linda and LinkedIn Learning videos are for. But I will go ahead and make a new post real quick. We're going to add new. I'm going to get out of these tooltips. We're going to say, I think I called it I survived WordPress on LAMP. This is my first post after installing WordPress on LAMP. I'm just going to click publish. And it, like I indicated, it tried to create these really fancy URLs that use the year, the month, the day, and the title of the post as part of the URL. If I click view post, it should take me to that web page. Look at that right there, the beautiful URL. I'm already logged in, so I keep this toolbar up at the top for being able to jump back to the admin page. But I can navigate around. So if I wanted to go back to the front page, I could just click on Brandon's Bistro. WordPress by default gives you a search engine. It shows you recent posts. There's even a way to log in and log out. Look at the categories that exist. I guess that categories page isn't working, but if I go back into the main dashboard here, there's posts, there are pages. You can figure out the difference in the videos and over the next few weeks. If I go to the appearance area, this is where you can look at all the other themes that are available. It ships with 3 by default. This is 2019 that we're using. I know much of the web still uses 2016 as its theme. I'm going to activate that one. And if I switch back to my webpage, you'll see the entire design of the website is different. For our final project, we're going to look at customizing and building our own themes even, so that you could design what a WordPress site looks like and the content gets slotted in as you create it. That's it, folks. We installed WordPress on top of our Linux VM. I know it was a long journey to get here, but it was worth it. This is my favorite part of the semester, that we're installing something that you could put on a resume as you know how to administer WordPress. And if you watch those LinkedIn learning videos, you'll learn about installing plugins. You'll learn about installing themes, creating nav bars and menus and different widgets that appear on the web page. You can do a lot with WordPress, and we're going to have fun exploring that. Let me see if there are any questions. And I think we did it about the exact same amount of time as last semester. That's awesome. And we had far more interesting tangents this time around. Thank you for your questions along the way. I do appreciate it. I'm going to just wait a couple minutes more in case there's any more questions. I guess I can go back to the VM challenge page. As you follow along, so as you do this on your own, I hope you'll take a few screenshots with the snipping tool or some other way of taking screenshots. Installing PHP, creating the WordPress database, any of these would be good. You don't have to do them all, but if you can just get some of the highlights of what we did together captured as you did it, I think that will make a really compelling Google Slides presentation. Just put in the screenshots, describe what you did underneath in the presenter notes, and that'll be sufficient for me. Definitely practice doing that in the VM. The good news is that for your final project at the end of the semester, you won't have to do all of these things because I will be setting up the server for you with Apache and PHP and MySQL already set up. But you will be doing some of the WordPress settings, setting permissions and installing WordPress. You'll be doing that part still. So practice this week. Remember, VirtualBox even has an ability to create snapshots along the way. Let's see if I can find. If I remote control my other computer that's actually running VirtualBox. I should not have gone off script. I don't think my computer's playing along today. Okay, there it is. So in VirtualBox, underneath the machine menu, you can take a snapshot. So if you wanted to take a snapshot before you start installing WordPress, then if something goes wrong, you could restore back to the before WordPress snapshot and just start over again. I don't know if we've really used that too far in the semester, but it's typically what I do so that I can reuse the VM multiple times in a semester when I'm showing people how to do things. So I thought I'd share that with you all tonight. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat room, so I'm going to end the web stream. If you have any questions this week, please contact me on Slack. I've been trying to reply ASAP to everyone. And your questions ahead of the live stream made a big difference this week. I hope we can maybe do that for the future live streams too. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.